All right, good afternoon, everyone. We will make a start as it's 4 o'clock. Thank you very much for joining us so promptly. It is a pleasure to see you all. I hope you're all, first of all, I hope you're all wrapped up nice and warm with the cold weather warning that's come in. I've got my Christmas jumper on. It's Christmas jumper day in the office at the moment, so that's keeping me wrapped up nice and warm. I'm Nick Wallace. I am the head of secondary delivery at Art Curriculum Plus. I've been working on the English Mastery Programme since it launched in ARC schools back in 2014. And today I'm hoping you're here to hear us talk about how we can perhaps avoid using PEA, PETAL and PETEZL, and how we can use different frameworks to teach analytical writing at sentence level. I am going to speak a little bit about who English Mastery are, who I am in a second. And while we're doing so, I'm going to do a quick activate for you in the chat. So hopefully, if you can open the chat box, here's a question for you. Who can tell me what the mnemonic PETEZL stands for? So for those of you who use the PETEZL acronym, what does it stand for? Because it was new to me until about a month ago. So if you'd like to pop it in the chat, 10 points to anyone who knows what PETEZL stands for. The agendas for the day, what we'll be looking at is the perils of PEE and those frameworks, the danger that they can lead to, and the results that lead to in students' writing. We'll look at the role of curriculum in developing students' analytical writing ability. We'll think about how we can use models to develop students' understanding of what excellence can look like, to develop their mental schemata. And then I'll be taking some time at the end of the session today to talk to you about education research projects that we're currently recruiting for with the Education Endowment Foundation. And there'll hopefully be time for question and answers as we go along as well. A little bit about who English Mastery are, about Art Curriculum Plus. We launched in ARC schools, a large multi-academy trust with schools in Portsmouth, Hastings, Birmingham and London back in 2014. And the English Mastery Programme was designed with a focus on designing and launching a complete curriculum programme for English, including the curriculum, the teaching resources, the professional development offer, an implementation infrastructure, and a complementary assessment framework too. We currently work with around 200 schools across the country, so some thousands of teachers, subject leaders that we have the privilege of working with this year. And the Education Endowment Foundation, the EEF, ran a research trial into English Mastery in 2019, which was unfortunately disrupted, but they did write a report on that, and I'll share with you some of the insights shortly, and how and why they've decided to run a new research trial, which we're currently recruiting for. ARC Curriculum Plus is part of the ARC Schools Multi-Academy Trust. We're a non-for-profit organisation, and we work with schools in English Mastery, Science Mastery, Mathematics Mastery, with schools the length and breadth of the whole of the UK, and have been doing so for over 10 years now. We are a non-profit organisation, and collectively our mission is to empower teachers to give every young person, regardless of their background, the subject knowledge and skills that will allow them to succeed. And today, the subject knowledge that we're going to be talking about is English and analytical writing, a subject very close to my heart and hopefully very close to some of your hearts too. So let's start. Let's open the session. The perils of PEE. At the moment, no one is in the running for the 10 points for knowing what PETEZL is, but don't worry, I will reveal all shortly if people are as bemused with it as I was. So the perils of PEE. The first thing I'd like to put forward to you, that I'd like to kind of suggest, is that when we use those analytical writing mnemonics, those frameworks, those scaffolds, whether it's PEA, PETAL, PETEZL, they can offer some students a useful framework. When we resort to those generic guidances, we have the opportunity to cover all bases, right? That blanket approach can cover all bases. But when it comes to exploring literature in all of its diversity, in all of its nuance, and all its subtlety, that blanket approach can really shroud all of the detail that makes our subject so rich and interesting and fascinating. That blanket approach really does risk assuming that we explore different types of literature: poetry, novels, non-fiction, long-form non-fiction, polemics, speeches in similar ways, or even different parts of the same text in different ways. Writers are it is their prerogative to be vexatious, to play with language, to be contradictory, to contradict themselves, to do the similar things in different ways at different parts in the text. When we begin to use those generic, laminated, stick it anywhere, blanket approach frameworks, we run the risk of obliterating all that detail, all of that nuance that makes literature, that makes reading so rich and engaging in the first instance. And a piece of a commentary that I find really that really speaks to me about this is by Dylan Wiliam, a famous educationist, perhaps most famous for his writing on assessment. In this passage, he's speaking about a piece of science teaching that he saw, but I think that there is a huge number of parallels with what we see in English as well. So this is, I'll read that for those of you who might be joining on a phone or who might not be able to see. So William writes, I remember talking to a middle school student who was looking at the feedback his teacher had given him on a science assignment. The teacher had written, "You need to be more systematic in planning your scientific inquiries." I asked the student what that meant to him, and he said, "I don't know. If I knew how to be more systematic, I'd have been more systematic in the first place." This kind of feedback is accurate, it's describing what needs to happen, but it's not helpful because the learner doesn't know how to use that feedback to improve. It's a bit like telling an unsuccessful comedian to be funnier, accurate, but not particularly helpful advice. And that certainly speaks to my experiences of teaching and the experience of a lot of the teachers I speak to, that sometimes they'll invite their students in their green pen writing and their red pen writing, you need to be more analytical. And the students will rightly turn around and say, I was trying to be analytical. If I knew how to be more analytical, I would have done so in the first place. Or you need to add more detail to the explore element of your PEE paragraph. If I knew how to explore, I would have done so in the first instance. So the perhaps contentious, but I hope it's not too contentious. I hope some of you will recognise this I don't hope some of you will recognise it in your own experiences, but we often see that generic tools can lead to generic results, those generic outcomes in students where they really struggle to get into the nuance, the detail, the depth, the intricacies of what it is they're reading, because the tools in which they're trying to to chip away at those texts just aren't equipping them with that knowledge, the skills to do so successfully. That isn't to say that there's not a place for those PE structures. And I think that a really simple, a really quick win that we can undertake is just to shift the way that we use them. If we move from the generic to the specific, we can actually support students in much more successful ways. So here is an example of a very common, like a PETAL, I've seen this in many classrooms, like a PETAL Pro 4, a PETAL mnemonic that some schools might stick up on their walls. They might have it laminated and stuck on tables. Point, your idea in response to the question. Evidence, choose a quotation. Technique, what sort of language is used here? Is there something in the structure to discuss? Analysis, link to author's ideas, / back to the point, / context, / next point. We can use that framework in principle, but if we shift it from the generic to the specific context that students are exploring at that moment, we will be able to support them in much more powerful ways. And what can that look like? Here's an example. What does this scene tell us about how Macbeth's ambition has changed? Which quotation best shows how determined Macbeth has come in his ambition? What does this quotation tell an audience about the nature of Macbeth's ambition, his desire to become the king? How does Macbeth's ambitions here compare to that of Lady Macbeth's earlier in the play? So as opposed to having a generic framework that students may struggle to find any purchase on, by offering a much more specific set of probing questions, students are more likely, we've seen students be more likely to write with greater insight and greater detail, and greater success rate, actually be more accurate, precise in that analysis. Now, some of you may say, well, that still seems like a real tight straitjacket for students. It might well, and you may well be right. This kind of structure may well inhibit those students who want to go on to get 9s at GCSE, 8s, 9s at GCSE. But I'd also argue that it's no less inhibiting and no less of a straitjacket in a PETAL paragraph in the first instance. So the first sort of collection of insights that I'd like to conclude with here is, as generic tools, PEE or PETAL structures can lead to generic results. One way to mitigate for this is to personalize the framework for the context in which it's being applied, the specific piece of analysis that students are currently undertaking. So that's some of the perils of PEE. I'd like to now talk about the role that curriculum can play in in developing students' analysis across a year, across a phase, across the type of secondary schools. So the chat is open. What I'm going to invite you to do now is to, if you can write in the chat, please, list down all of the components of a successful piece of analytical writing. So when you're thinking about a piece of analytical writing, what different elements are you expecting to see in there? Give you 60 seconds. Don't worry, I've got a fail safe in case some of you, you've got frostbite because it's so cold where you are.
I think our attendees may be having a slight issue with the chat mix. So if they move to the Q&A question and answer instead, and then we'll be able to see those and you can read them out as they come in.
Wonderful, thank you. So if you would like to, as opposed to the chat feature, if you could instead list it in the Q&A section. So what are the components of a successful piece of analytical writing? If you'd like to pop them down in the Q&A section, we should be able to see them and you should be able to type them. Thank you. So they are beginning to come in. Thank you. A bit thicker and a bit faster now. Great. Great, thank you. So they're coming in. So we have thesis, analysis of writer's method, succinct identification of the answer to the question, actually addressing the question, a balanced argument for, against, benefits, drawbacks, advantages, disadvantages, clear topic sentences or ideas supported by quotation and associated analysis, key terms to support where appropriate, a logical structure, love to see that, evidence and reference, originality, how do we teach originality, relevant to the task in question, a critique, yeah, absolutely, maybe thinking about some different literary approaches, builds on clear primary observations to explore various meanings that exist within the writer's language. Yeah, so thinking about the fundamental the writer's language and the meanings they're trying to convey, embedded quotations, relevant historical context, specific word analysis, the effect on a reader, an audience, multiple interpretations, evidence of the tools and methods used. As you can imagine, I'm not going to. I'll be here for the rest of the session reading out those. Thank you all for contributing. And you can probably, I hope you can sense that there's a bit of about to kind of pull the rug beneath from under our feet a little bit. Here are some of the ideas that we had. So discussion, and this is not comprehensive, and even if we did incorporate everything in the chat, it wouldn't be comprehensive either. This is to illustrate the breadth of different things that we might be expecting students to grapple with. Discussion of characterization, characters arc across a narrative, narrative structure, voice, exploration of form, convention, some close text analysis. We might want a student to use some rich, interesting vocabulary to support their analysis. A discussion of the writer's craft, the writer's intention, maybe integrating context of contemporary society, production, reception, but also how we review it and how the text might be received today. A thesis statement that is established early on the essay, then developed throughout. Exploration of alternative interpretations, perhaps with different types of literary criticism embedded throughout too. Use of relevant topic sentences to help steer us through that essay. Apt embedded references throughout the essay. And we'd also perhaps want them to use the appropriate academic form, structure expression so that they are able to articulate themselves in an appropriately sophisticated way. What I hope, and that isn't incorporating many of the additional comments that we have there in the chat too. I hope that you can perhaps see that that's an enormous amount of cognitive load to place on a student. What a huge amount of ideas, concepts, pieces, like items of knowledge that we might be expecting or inviting students to implement at any one time in the curriculum or any one time in their analytical writing. So when we think about the role of the curriculum, it's important to acknowledge and recognise that when we're trying to build those analytical habits in students, it might be foolish to try to do everything all at once. We place too much cognitive load on students. So what's the way out then? If we can't do everything all at once, what is the solution to that? I'm going to talk you through how we approach the gradual layering of those analytical skills in the English mastery curriculum in our Key Stage 3 English curriculum. The texts in bold are our core curriculum texts. So I'll just talk you through those texts and some of the skills that we deliberately practice throughout. So in Year 7, in Oliver Twist, we'll start by establishing what makes a successful topic sentence. In A Midsummer Night's Dream, we'll move on to how to annotate a passage or a text in detail, how to select the best quotation and how to embed them into your essay, how to compose extended analytical paragraphs. We'll then move on to how to do some close textual analysis, language analysis, exploration of poetic form, with a real focus on figurative language. In Year 8, we'll move on to how to link paragraphs across an essay to give a sense of cohesion and begin to sow the seeds of the work on building a thesis and sustaining a thesis. In The Tempest, we'll look at the discipline of responding to a closed book examination and how to make textual references even when you don't have a play or the novel in front of you. In Animal Farm, we'll move on to beginning to integrate social historical context into an answer as well. In Year 9, students are beginning to become more mature in their analysis. So we'll look at how to introduce and sustain a thesis across the whole essay. With Small Island, we'll look at how to analyse a text at a macro level, including different cultural and critical interpretations of a text. And that final unit we'll embark on before GCSE will involve critical comparisons between texts. Don't just involve ping-ponging between poem. That isn't to say that students can't and shouldn't be expected to do things in later years and later terms earlier, only to say that when we're thinking about the role of curriculum, we can be really specific about how and when we're inviting students to develop those skills so that we don't overwhelm them. So we don't overwhelm them with all different types of analysis, all the different parts of that discipline at any one time. And that's important to consider cognitive load, because it's not just, I appreciate this may render quite small on screen, it's not just the analytical writing that we're trying to teach students at that point in the curriculum. There'll also be a breadth of vocabulary, of powerful knowledge about the text that we want students to be grappling with, about different other parts of speech and grammar, other writing skills that we'll be inviting them to really consider too. So when we think about the role of the curriculum at macro level, it is a part of the jigsaw that we have to make sure we're thinking long term about that gradual acquisition of skill, of knowledge, so that students can be successful at each step of the way. And just to zoom in a little bit on those two texts in Year 7, analytical writing topic sentences also needs to be juggled with students understanding the role of characterization of protagonists and antagonists, of vulnerable characters and exploitative characters, and Dickens's moral role with Oliver Twist, all of which are really complex, which can be really complex concepts for students to grapple with early in their career. And I'm really excited by this slide actually. So what can that look like in practice, and what are the ramifications there when we're thinking about developing students' analytical writing over time. So this is an example of a live student's work. We standardized this at a training session literally last night. So this is a very, very recent bit of work from a student. They're responding to a question on on what type of character is Bill Sykes. It's a year 7 student. And there are some really fantastic things going on here, which I'll just point out to you. We see some great vocabulary: unforgiving, dehumanized, animalistic, manipulated, corrupted, volatile, menacing. The student's applying some great vocabulary there. The student is, even at this early stage in year 7, composing a balanced argument. They're looking at how animalistic Bill Sykes is, but we also see his humanity when he shows that regret and that remorse when he kills Nancy at the end of the text. Spoiler alert, but the text is 150 years old. There are some things, though, that this student hasn't done, right? And we may be tempted to give this student some feedback saying, you haven't really spoken about Dickens's intention. You haven't discussed the contemporary reception of Sykes, or or how society, the context of society was influencing Sykes' character. You haven't really done any thematic analysis here. It may be really tempting to offer those EBIs to this student at that point, but it's also important to acknowledge that a lot of that stuff may not have been taught. And those moments, those facets of that academic writing, of that analysis, they will have their moment in the sun. They will have their time to shine in the curriculum when a department converges and agrees, this is what we're going to teach, this is how we're going to teach it, and this is the text upon which we're going to hang those pieces of analysis. So, for example, that context, we know, as I narrated earlier, will come in and it will place a greater, sharper focus in that animal farm unit. The discussion about theme will see a bit more consistency in year 9. That isn't to say that the student shouldn't be invited to think about those concepts, those themes earlier in year 7 and year 8, but only to acknowledge that they will be really systematically taught those things later on. And so when we're thinking about how to get better or more insightful analysis from students, we really can see the role that the curriculum has to play, and that sequencing of curriculum, what's taught, when, and why. So the implication and the summary for this next section: departments should plan for the gradual acquisition of analytical skills throughout a student's career. Mapping out those foci for each year, each term, or text can help manage students' cognitive load and allow for more precise feedback to students. They can be much more granular in the ways in which they're becoming more successful analytical writers. The curriculum, as well as having that macro impact on analysis, we can also see that play out on a week-to-week or day-to-day or lesson-to-lesson term as well. So for those of you who may be maybe newer in your career, maybe earlier in your careers, who maybe don't have the mapping out of that curriculum across 5 years is perhaps beyond your control, there are other things that we can do in a lesson-to-lesson basis that will allow students to become more successful, more insightful with their analysis, without resorting to adding a new letter onto a PEA acronym. And the principle behind this is that to think back to the Dylan William quotation earlier, you could have been more analytical. Well, that analysis needs to be rooted in a deep and rich knowledge of the text. So how can we invite students to play with that knowledge, to develop that knowledge in ways which are interesting and meaningful, that will allow them to be more successful? And before I give you some examples, I'll narrate this with a couple of examples from outside the world of the classroom, and invite you to think about the difference between practice and performance. So we've got 2 examples here. I'll start with Anthony Joshua, the former British champion boxer. The type of performance, the thing that Anthony Joshua is working towards, is going 15 rounds, slugging it out, going toe to toe with some 230-pound brute with an arm's reach of 9 yards, and to defeat and to fight him in a head-to-head combat. The types of training, the types of practice that Joshua will complete to prepare for that will look really, really different to being in a fight. He'll undertake speed work with a skipping rope. He'll be boxing with a speed ball. He'll be swimming. He'll be undertaking core strength exercise. He'll be doing sprint work. He'll be in the weight room, and each of those elements of practice look completely different to the performance he's eventually working to. Similarly, the kind of feedback that we'd give to that practice will look really different to the feedback that we'd give in the performance. So when he's working, maybe imagine he's weightlifting, the feedback there will be about form, will be about the number of reps, will be about the weight that's lifted, which looks completely different. It's really distinct to the kind of feedback that we might need to give Joshua when he's actually in the ring. So we really see that the distinction between practice and performance. A similar principle at work with Picasso. This is really well told in Matthew Said's book Bounce. As a younger artist, Picasso would spend weeks and weeks and weeks, and months practicing drawing figures like in a classically realistic way. So he'd spend weeks practicing drawing hands, noses, faces, eyes, to become to acquire an absolute mastery of the fundamentals of the craft, which then unlocked that creativity, that originality that we see in these masterpieces like Guernica. In the same way that we had with Anthony Joshua, the practice takes a completely different form to that final performance. And we have something similar at work when we're thinking about developing students' analytical writing. It isn't always helpful to practice, to get students to become better analytical writers by doing loads of analytical writing. There are other elements of practice that we can invite them to undertake to develop that fluency, to develop that deep, rich, interesting knowledge. Here are some examples from the English mastery curriculum. I'm going to have to explain this a little bit because I appreciate that insult bogey tennis is perhaps a bit of a strange one. So this is an example from A Midsummer Night's Dream. A Midsummer Night's Dream is a Shakespearean comedy where a love potion creates loads of different conflicts and carnage between four young lovers. So there's some other plots as well, but that's one of the main plots we explore in our unit. Two of the female characters, Hermia and Helena, are best friends, but they have a big falling out when the love potion causes one of the men to fall in to switch his allegiance from Hermia to Helena. So they have these two characters, Hermia and Helena, have a big falling out. In the lesson, would invite students to take a dramatic approach to the passage where they're having a big argument, where they have to escalate the expressions, the vocal, the speech, the dramatic presentation of the fight, and it's something which we know teachers and students really enjoy, but it's not enjoyment for novelty or enjoyment's sake, just to get it on its feet. Actually, there's a really important principle at work here, because we need to understand A Midsummer Night's Dream as a comedy. It is a farce, and one of the ways in which that comedy is created is by having these characters shout and scream at each other in absolutely outrageous ways. So the practice we see here of the students enacting that drama, enacting that comedy, it doesn't look like writing an analytical paragraph, but that practice is going to support them to write a more insightful analysis later on, because they have that understanding of the role of drama, the role that drama and that performance has in establishing comedy. Similarly, here is a different activity on the same text on A Midsummer Night's Dream. We explore the ending of the play where one of the characters remains under the impression of the love potion. So we can establish a debate here between students. Is a happy ending because at the end of the play, the lovers are happy. There's no more conflict. There's no unrequited love. Or does the end of the play actually undermine the notion of true love? We only see that character Demetrius is in love with Helena because he's under the influence of the love potion. Actually, it is a really cynical ending to the play, because Shakespeare undermines the notion of free will. have a debate. Which of these statements do you agree with the most? And students can develop that argument. They might again enjoy composing a non-fiction piece right here, where they're debating the merits and otherwise of these two statements. And again, does this look like an analytical paragraph? Perhaps not. This debate, though, does allow them to formulate an idea, does them allow them to put it into words, but without that, without pushing them down that funnel of a PEE paragraph, and allows some more interesting and open ways of reflecting on the text. And as a final example, one of the questions we pose to students is the love potion good or bad? And we can invite students to compose that in a table. Tell me the reasons why it's good. Tell me the reasons why it's bad. Is it good because it allows us to the lovers to be happy at the end of the play? Is it good because it allows us to as an audience, it creates a huge amount of humour for us, and it's actually a great dramatic device? Is it negative because actually it causes a huge amounts of disruption? It actually undermines the relationships of the four lovers. It leaves us on a real cliffhanger, wondering is the what is the nature of free will? Again, just composing some bullet point lists in a table, it doesn't look like that final performance element. But by inviting students to undertake this kind of activity, we are supporting them to become more successful in that writing too. So to draw that section together, practice can and should take different forms of performance. An understanding of the composite parts of the skill being rehearsed will allow students to develop the different knowledge that they'll need. So, in other words, we can get students to be more analytical by doing things that don't look like a typical piece of analysis. The final thing that I'd like to speak to you about with regards to developing students' analytical writing is the role that modelling can have in developing students' understanding of what excellence looks like. Many of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with the Brack-Rosenshine paper, Principles of Instruction. It's a piece of education research which is really enjoying its moment in the sun at the moment. And one of the key principles of instruction that Brack-Rosenshine details there is the importance of providing models. So providing students with models and worked examples can help them to learn to solve problems faster. There are a huge number of ways in which providing models or developing models can benefit your teaching and your students. These are just a few, and I'll also exemplify this for you in just a moment. It can clarify what your expectations are of students. And I remember when I was teaching, I would occasionally resort to we'll do a piece of reading and then we'll complete an analytical paragraph. And I would sometimes wonder why students were struggling with that piece of analysis, because I hadn't undertaken that task myself. And when I actually sat down to compose that task myself, I realized that I hadn't really set the task in a way that allows students to be successful. And by completing that model, it gave me that deeper understanding, not just of the task that I was trying to get students to engage with, but also of the text itself. It forced me to really engage with what it was that students were reading, were studying at that time. It can also allow us to have a much clearer understanding of where are students going to be struggling with. Where are we placing that cognitive load on students? Is it on using vocabulary? Is it on writing a topic sentence? Is it in exploring the way this character has changed across text? It also allows you to identify the tacit knowledge, that knowledge that you carry around with you, that you take completely for granted, that your students may not have, or that cultural capital that you have that perhaps your students don't have access to. Presenting models also allows students to develop an understanding of what great looks like, and we can also use non-examples too to show them what bad looks like too. That can also be helpful, and that, in many regards, is much more instructive than presenting a success criteria, which can which can allow loads and loads of room for error, loads of white space for interpretation. Whereas if we present models, that helps define what that looks like. Modeling in front of students can also, and narrating a thought process is also a great way to develop students' metacognitive approaches, and the importance of metacognition of students is increasingly well understood and across schools. And a tip which I'm sure will not be new to many of you, but we can also use those models to aid scaffolding in some interesting ways too. So here's an example of a teacher that I worked with. They wrote their own response to the assessment task of A Midsummer Night's Dream. I won't make you read it, but the teacher really enjoyed composing that essay. They really enjoyed grasping with that, and they composed this not at a Year 7 students level. They composed it at their own adult pitch, right? They really wanted to think deeply, carefully about that task. And what that then allowed them to do, when we were looking through their response, we then unpicked how can you use this in the classroom, or how can you use this when you're planning for your students? And it pulled out a few really important things that really influence what the teacher did in the classroom. So it allowed the teacher to see the love potion, above all else, is a dramatic device. It's something that Shakespeare is deploying deliberately. We also see with Titania, the fairy queen, when she falls in love with Bottom, a lowly actor with an ass's head, the role that status has in establishing the farce. Actually, the status of those characters, the relative status of those characters, is really, really important for students to understand if they're going to grasp the comedic nature of this scene. It's also critical for students to understand just how over the top, just how exaggerated Titania is when she describes her love for Bottom. This isn't just a text saying ILY. She really does go to town with her with saying how beautiful and how infatuated she is with Bottom. Similarly, the teacher unpicked that they really appreciated the play as being performed and received by an audience, and if they weren't writing about the audience's reception, they weren't really doing the text justice. So they were always thinking about the role of the audience's reaction and how an audience would respond to that passage. And equally, the teacher really saw the role of the comedic form. And Midsummer Night's Dream is a comedy. We are meant to laugh at it. It is funny. And the teacher really identified that they needed to draw out that comedic element at every point in the play with their students. So far from being an exercise in vanity, the teacher, by composing that model outside the classroom in a preparation kind of space, it really informed how they taught that text throughout the term. But it also did them a solid, right? Because when they taught that lesson later on in the term, they were able to draw back on this to see some of the misconceptions that students might fall into, but they also gave themselves a great platform for a scaffold. So all they did was adapt some of the sentences there and use that as some sentence stems for their students. So by composing those models, a teacher can just strip out some of the content, depending on the needs of their students, depending on what the focus would be, and then give them some sentence stems to allow them to compose with greater precision. And they'll be planning about how and when to add more scaffolding, how and when to take away sentence stems, how and when to compose this in the classroom, outside the classroom, how to do this here, how to get students to compose these sentence stems in pairs, think, pair, share, all of those strategies. But the teacher having that model in advance really supported them in that moment and throughout the term too. So modelling, live or composing beforehand, offers a wealth of benefits. And we can see in the title of the session, we discuss about the role of sentence level and thinking about composing sentences, building sentences as a way to move forward with analysis. Hopefully that the role of modelling there begins to illustrate ways forward there. Modelling live or composing beforehand offers a wealth of benefits. Those models can be used for planning, before a lesson's taught, they can be used to teach actual instruction in the moment, and they can also be used to assess students, a benchmark against which to compare students' writing as well. So absolutely can and should be used very, very, very liberally. So that draws to a close the session that I've presented to you on the perils of PEE, PEA, PETAL and PETEZL. I'm going to reveal to you now what the acronym PETEZL stands for. It's point, evidence, technique, exploration, zoom, and link. And what I sincerely hope is that you're not all scribbling down what that acronym stands for and you're going to use it in your classroom tomorrow. I hope that throughout the session we've just gone through, allow you to reflect a bit more carefully around how those models, how those mnemonics and frameworks, how they may or may not be more or less suitable to use on a day-to-day basis. If you have any questions about anything that I've spoken about, please do pop them in the question and answer chat, and we will have and I'll fill them shortly. What I'm going to be speaking to you now about is a project that we're currently recruiting to in partnership with the Education Endowment Foundation. So we're inviting schools to join the English Mastery Programme to embark upon an education research trial with the Education Endowment Foundation, the EEF. So I'll tell you a little bit more about what exactly English Mastery is. We've already shown you, I've already illustrated today that English Mastery presents a complete curriculum framework. We have a fully resourced curriculum. We've seen a curriculum map. We've some examples from lesson materials today as well. But it isn't just the curriculum resources. There's also the lesson guidance that sits around it, and a training and professional development offer too that support schools to implement that curriculum too. It isn't just the lessons resources, it's also the implementation infrastructure, the professional development that allows schools to make it appropriate and to make it really successful in their own context. And we also provide a comprehensive bank of assessment materials so that you as teachers can understand how well are your students progressing through the curriculum at any point in Key Stage 3. We looked at an example of a live student's work there from year 7, and that was used to inform some standardization discussions that we had last night and are taking place this week. How well are students in schools today graduating through the curriculum, and how can we use those examples of student work to inform what happens next in classrooms too. So it's a complete curriculum program which entails a huge range of supports, guidance, documents and resources too. We launched back in 2014 in ARC schools, and the programme had a lot of success in ARC schools. And as a result of the impact we had in ARC schools in 2014 to 2017, the EEF said that they wanted to run a research trial into the programme. We launched a research trial in 2019, which unfortunately had to be suspended due to the pandemic. However, the EEF still published a report into their findings, into the impact English Mastery had on teachers. And the findings of that report are really, really insightful and show all the ways in which we support teachers to become more effective in classrooms, and we support their workload too. So here are some headlines. This is what teachers say in an independent evaluation. This isn't 9 out of 10 dogs prefer pedigree charm. This is an independent evaluation conducted by an external evaluator. And these are the findings. And these, in terms of education research figures, are really, really compelling statistics. So 74% of teachers said that English Mastery improved students' grammar skills. 63 said it improved their reading skills. 68 said it's their writing skills. And 75% of teachers said English Mastery improved their overall progress. Really high statistics for an independent education evaluation. And here's a bit of texture for that. Here is a quotation from a teacher. The key words that English Mastery build on: corrupt, naive, malicious. We've seen students retain that from year 7, which has been amazing because you can see that's the impact of the retrieval and interleaving. It's been really impressive. We've seen students, even in today's session, grappling with words of corruption, naivety and maliciousness. Teachers also saw the curriculum as being really successful. 89% of teachers said the literary heritage strand was quite or very effective, and 73% said our writing curriculum, writing mastery, was quite or very effective. Again, in terms of industry standards, these are really, really, really high figures. And this is what a teacher said about our writing program. My subject knowledge with grammar and how we teach grammar has improved hugely. Speaking to other teachers within the department, I think they too agree with that. The subject knowledge with teaching grammar, we've all improved 100%. And how did teachers view the programme more broadly? 81% would recommend English Mastery to another school. 84% were satisfied with the training and support we have. So we have a really close, intimate relationship with schools where we go into schools, we provide bespoke training for departments. This is what a teacher said about our support. The English Mastery team give really excellent feedback and really, really get down to the nitty-gritty of what our problems are and how to iron those out, and then gives us tips. It's brilliant, actually. So as a teacher's commentary on the support that we were able to offer the department. And this is one that is very, very, very close to my heart. We're in the middle of a real workload crisis, a well-being crisis with teaching, and the marking workload in English, as we know, is greater than many, many other subjects. Our programme, 80% of teachers said that English Mastery helped to reduce their planning and marking workload, which we see as a real, I'm particularly proud of how we're able to support the sector with that particular, with that workload price. Here's what the teacher said, and this is a really important, this is an important point to bring back to our, to bring back to our mission. This is what the teacher said. What we're able to do now is think about how we deliver the resources. It is something that's empowering to be able to not just have to think about the nitty-gritty of writing a PowerPoint slide and all of the rest of it. We're actually able to think about how we deliver the content, the ability to be able to think about it as a teacher rather than someone who's having to design a PowerPoint is very liberating and actually a far better use of teachers' time. And this comment really sums up our mission about empowering teachers. The curriculum frameworks, the teaching resources we provide are there to empower teachers, to allow them to do more insightful and higher leverage activities in that planning time to allow them to be even more effective in the classroom. So that's a little bit about the programme, a little bit about the impact that we've already had on schools across the country. We are currently inviting schools to apply to join us on a randomised control trial. So I'll tell you now what a randomised controlled trial, or RCT, is. The trial is going to assess the impact of a knowledge-rich English curriculum on pupil progress for 2023's Year 7 cohort. So your Year 7s will be joining you next September. It will also consider how the centralised curricula can contribute to reducing teachers' workload. The trial, the RCT, places schools into two groups, the treatment group and the control group. I'll tell you more about those groups now. The treatment group is 50-50 split. The treatment group are randomly allocated by our independent evaluators, Sheffield Hallam University, and they will receive the whole English Mastery programme. It will evaluate the impact of the programme on your Year 7 cohort after 2 years. So we'll look at how much progress your September 2023 Year 7s have, the progress they make after 2 years of studying English Mastery. Those schools in the treatment group will need to make a financial contribution. You do need some skin in the game, but it is an enormous saving of the programme of over 80% of. So the saving is over £6,500. So they only pay £900 in the first year and another £900 in the second year. Schools can access the complete Key Stage 3 programme for Year 7 and 8 and 9, but will only be measuring the impact on that 2023 Year 7 cohort. So you can teach a programme to your years 8 and 9 if you'd like to, and we'll be following those Year 7s through their time at school. The second group, the other 50-50 set group, they will be random allocated to the control group and are unable to complete English Mastery. They'll continue with you will continue with your existing curriculum as planned. You don't have to make any changes. You can do whatever you want to. If you'd like to change to something else, you're more than welcome to. If you want to stick with what you've got, you're more than welcome to. You just will be unable to work with English Mastery. Those control schools, and again, in a time of tight budgets, those control schools, it's a win for those schools as well, because for participating in education research, we will make a payment to the school of £1,250 for submitting some data, and it's data that schools already collect about pupils' Key Stage 2 data. It's about their classes and some of their demographics. So it's data that schools already collect and will be paid for submitting it to the evaluators. To be eligible, you need to be an English state school. You need to be non-selective. You need to have a Year 7 cohort in 2023 and a Year 8 cohort in 2024. So that does exclude some middle schools. And you can't have delivered English Mastery in the past. And we are unable to we're unable to welcome special schools onto the trial either. That's a point to add as well. So if you have any questions about the research trial, if you'd like to pick my brains about PEA, PETAL, PETEZLs, I'm more than happy to field any questions you have for the next 10 minutes. Thank you very much for attending today. We will be sending a follow-up to you with all the information today about the session, and also information about how you can join us for the education research trial as well. And thank you all, as I say, for attending. I will now, the floor is now open to the question and answer section. So I will be keeping an eye on those questions, and I will try to field them to the best of my ability. How can you, an anonymous attendee, hi anonymous, how can you move away from a scaffold if you have limited time, such as research students and a cohort who struggle building up even to these? I would probably suggest that the use of models there can be really, really helpful, and really mapping out for students, this is what excellence looks like. Let's unpick the process that we had to do here, some composition in a classroom with a student using some of those metacognitive approaches. In some of those scaffolds, I want to make it really clear, as I mentioned quite early on as well, for many students, those scaffolds can be really, really supportive. So especially for those lower priority attainers, those who are building towards that grade 4, having that scaffold can be a really, really powerful framework. It can reduce cognitive load in lots of ways. The advice I might give is to think about making them as specific as you possibly can in many instances, and that over time, after students apply that framework in lots of different contexts across time, they will see that the emerging pattern, that system will emerge through exposure to lots of different practices. So please don't think that I'm wanting to completely put the kibosh on those frameworks. They absolutely have a time, they absolutely have a place, and there are some different ways, which I hope I've narrated today, that we can use them to have even more impact. Are there any plans for ARC curriculum to work with further education institutes who deliver GC English language resits? We're only a year to work with students with FaceTime training. So I suspect that may be, as another anonymous attendee, if anonymous attendee number 2, do look out for our email in the follow-up for today. We'd be more than happy to explore the context in which you're working. Even if it isn't English Mastery, who are a Key Stage 3 programme, we do have colleagues who specialise in working with research students, and we can point you in their direction. So there are other colleagues which we would be more than happy to introduce you to. If you want to do a quick Google, the partner organisation is called Get Further, and they specialise in working with research students at post-16 settings. A few thank yous, my pleasure. One person's asked how to enable chat. I think we are using the Q&A function. And my colleague Phil, who has been very ably helping today, has also posted some useful links in the chat for you. If you would like to book a call to discuss your context, to discuss joining the programme, to join the trial, you can book a call, or you can contact us by email. I will wait for another 60 seconds or so, just in case someone is writing out a really lengthy and nuanced question. I wouldn't want to lose that in the Q&A. Well, in which case, all that remains for me to say is to say thank you once again for joining us this afternoon. I hope you have a great. I'll stop sharing. I hope you enjoy the rest of term. I hope you have a very restful Christmas period when it comes, and we'll look forward to being in contact with you in very shortly over the coming weeks. Thank you very much, and have a great evening.